My fiancé's friends joked that he had a backup fiancé waiting if I ever messed up. I smiled like it was no big deal. Then I walked over to the girl they meant, put the cheap $120 ring in her hand and said, "Go ahead, he's yours." Now, the whole room went silent and I finally felt in control. My fiancé's best friend called another woman his backup fiancé at our engagement party in front of 20 people. In my apartment, while I was in the kitchen slicing salami. "Come on, we all know it," Brandon slurred, swaying with his beer raised high. "If Marissa ever messes up, Leela's ready on the bench." "Right, backup fiancé." The laughter was immediate. Uncomfortable, I stood there frozen, waiting for Ethan to say something. Waiting for him to shut it down, waiting for him to defend me, to tell Brandon he'd crossed a line, to prove that I wasn't just a placeholder until someone better came along. He laughed. "My fiancé, the man who'd proposed to me 8 months ago with a $120 ring and called it ironic, stood there and laughed while his best friend announced to everyone that I was replaceable. Leela, the childhood friend he'd always sworn was like a sister, sat on my sofa smiling. Not embarrassed, not horrified, please. That smile told me everything I needed to know, so I made a decision. I pulled the engagement ring from my jacket pocket, walked through the silent crowd, and handed it directly to her. Tag in. "Sweetheart, he's all yours," but I'm getting ahead of myself to understand how I got to that moment, how I ended up destroying my own engagement party in front of everyone Ethan cared about. You need to know who I was before that night. You need to know the life I thought I was building. My name is Marissa Hale. I'm 32 years old, and until 3 nights ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I'm a graphic designer, freelance, which means I work from home in pajamas more often than I admit in polite company, and my downtown loft doubles as my office. It's small, but mine, exposed brick walls, tall windows overlooking the city, just enough room for a bed, a workspace, and a vintage sofa I found at an estate sale and convinced myself was charming instead of uncomfortable. I love that space, still do. It was fully mine. My name on the lease, my furniture, my rules. Ethan had moved in slowly about a year into our relationship. It started small, a toothbrush in the bathroom, some clothes in the closet, then his laptop appeared on my desk, his shoes by the door, his entire life bleeding into mine until I couldn't remember what the loft looked like before him. We'd been together 5 years, met at a mutual friend's barbecue on a sticky summer afternoon. He was standing by the grill, good-naturedly arguing with the host about proper charcoal technique, and when he laughed, it was the kind of laugh that made everyone around him want to join in. He seemed easy, uncomplicated, steady in a way the men I dated before never were. No games, no drama, just Ethan with his easy smile and terrible dad jokes and his habit of resting his hand on the small of my back when we walked through crowded spaces. He worked as a sales manager for a tech startup, one of those jobs that sounds impressive at dinner parties but means unpredictable hours and commission-based pay that swung wildly from month to month. I didn't mind. My design work paid well enough. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We had routines, small traditions that felt like the foundation of something real. Sunday mornings meant the farmer's market. We'd walk there together, Ethan carrying the canvas bags while I picked out vegetables I'd inevitably forget to cook before they went bad. Then we'd come back to the loft, brew coffee and sit on the balcony, watching the city wake up. Beneath us, those mornings felt solid, like proof we were building something that mattered. My younger sister, Vanessa, lives 2 hours away with her husband, Tom, and their 6-year-old twin boys. She's one of those people who sees through everything, who asks the uncomfortable questions no one else wants to voice. The first time she met Ethan was at a family dinner about 4 years ago. She'd pulled me aside in the kitchen afterward while I was loading the dishwasher. "He's too smooth," she said, her voice low. "Watch him." I'd laughed it off. "You don't trust anyone." "I trust people who don't perform for an audience." She handed me another plate, her eyes serious. "He's different when people are watching him." I told her she was being overprotective, that Ethan was just naturally charismatic, that being likable wasn't a character flaw, but her words stuck with me, a small seed of doubt I kept trying to bury. My parents adored him, though, both retired teachers living in a modest ranch house in central Riverland. They'd welcomed Ethan like he was already family. My dad, Richard Hale, taught him how to grill grouper. My mom, Emily, started emailing him recipes for her famous lasagna. Every phone call ended with them asking about wedding plans, their voices bright with hope. 8 months ago, Ethan proposed. We were at our usual coffee shop, a hole in the wall place 2 blocks from the loft that made the best oat milk lattes in the city. It was a Tuesday morning. I was working on a logo redesign for a local bakery, laptop open, only half focused on the screen because Ethan kept grinning at me from across the table, a way that made me suspicious. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. He slid it across the table and opened it. Inside was a ring, hammered silver, cubic zirconia stone, obviously unmistakably cheap. "It's ironic," he said, that grin widening. "We're not those people who need a big diamond to prove anything. This is authentic. This is so us." I'd laughed, actually laughed, charmed by the gesture, by the idea that we were somehow above materialism, that our love was built on something deeper than expensive jewelry. I said yes. He slipped the ring on my finger right there in the coffee shop, and we took a selfie that I immediately posted with the caption, "He went ajarred, just kidding," but I said yes anyway. Comments flooded in within minutes. Heart emojis, congratulations. Friends saying it was sweet and authentic and perfect for us, but there were other reactions too, quieter ones. My coworker Sarah, a sharp-tongued woman in her early 40s who'd survived 2 divorces and had seen everything, texted me an hour later, "Cute ring, you good with it?" I sent back a thumbs-up emoji. Of course I was good with it. It was ironic it was us, but when I showed her the ring in person the next day at the office, she raised one perfectly arched eyebrow, said absolutely nothing, and went back to her coffee. That silence said everything her words didn't. I felt doubt flicker, then small, barely there. But I shoved it down fast, told myself I was being shallow, that love wasn't measured by the size of a stone or the price on a receipt. Ethan was different. That's what I kept telling myself. He was real. Planning the engagement party became more complicated than I'd expected. Ethan wanted it casual. His friends, my loft, beer, wine, nothing fancy. His mother, Victoria, had other ideas. Victoria was the kind of woman who wore pearl earrings to brunch and had strong opinions about everything from silverware to thread count. She'd wanted a formal dinner at the country club where she was a member, printed Invitations, a seated meal, the kind of event that announced to her social circle that her son was marrying. Well, I'd suggested a compromise, a nice restaurant, something in between. Ethan shut it down immediately. My friends would hate that, Marissa. They'd feel like they have to behave. This is supposed to be fun, so we did it his way. My loft. Casual dress, 20 people, most of whom I'd only met once or twice. I spent the entire week before the party preparing, cleaning every corner of the apartment, buying 3 kinds of cheese and 2 types of crackers, building a charcuterie board that could have been photographed for a magazine, stringing Edison bulbs across the exposed brick walls to create that warm, intimate glow Ethan said would look perfect. He helped by sending out the invites and telling me not to stress. The morning of the party, I ran into Mrs. Lee in the hallway. She's my neighbor, an elderly widow who's lived in the building for 32 years. She always asks about my life with genuine interest, the kind older women have when they've seen enough to know what matters. I was carrying grocery bags from the car when she held the elevator door for me. Big night tonight, she said, with a warm smile. Yeah, engagement party. Oh, how wonderful. Have you set date yet? I shifted the bags in my arms. Not yet. Ethan wants to enjoy being engaged for a while first. No rush, Mrs. Lee's smile didn't fade, but something shifted in her eyes. She gave me a long, measured look. A man who sure doesn't need to wait, she said quietly. Then the elevator doors opened on her floor, and she stepped out, leaving me alone with my groceries and a knot tightening in my chest. I tried to shake off her words, told myself she was old-fashioned, that there was no right timeline for these things, that Ethan and I were fine. That evening, I got ready carefully. I chose a simple navy dress, nothing too formal, nothing that would make Ethan's college friends feel out of place. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting the neckline, smoothing down my hair, staring at my own reflection like I was trying to convince her everything was okay. The ring caught the overhead light, dull-hammered silver cubic zirconia that didn't quite sparkle. Ironic, I reminded myself. I took a deep breath and told myself to stop overthinking. Vanessa's skepticism had gotten into my head. Mrs. Lee's comment meant nothing. I just needed to relax and enjoy the celebration. But as I heard the first knock at the door, as I forced a smile and opened it to welcome strangers into my home, I couldn't silence the small, insistent voice whispering in the back of my mind. Something isn't right. I just didn't know yet how terrifyingly right that voice was. The first attendees arrived at 7:00, and within minutes I understood. This wasn't going to be my party. Ethan's college friends came through the door like they owned the place. Loud voices, back-slapping hugs inside, jokes flying across my loft before they'd even bothered to acknowledge me. I stood near the entrance with what I hoped looked like a welcoming smile, accepting coats and bottles of wine people had brought, directing them toward the drinks table. I'd spent an hour setting up perfectly. You must be Marissa, one guy said. Cal, I think his name was. We'd met once before at a bar months ago. He didn't wait for my response before brushing past me toward Ethan, who was already holding court near the kitchen island. I watched Ethan transform. He was everywhere at once, moving through the room with an energy I rarely saw at home, refilling drinks, cranking up the music, launching into stories that had everyone doubled over, laughing, stories I wasn't part of, memories from a time before me. Every time I tried to join a conversation, too stand beside him like we were supposed. To be a team tonight, he'd drift away. A hand on someone else's shoulder, another. Drink to pour, another laugh to chase. By 7:15, I'd quietly accepted my role, the host, not the guest of honor. Just the person making sure no one's glass stayed empty. I refilled the ice bucket, wiped up a spill someone left on the coffee table, rearranged the charcuterie board I'd spent $45 on, making sure the salami roses looked magazine perfect, even though nobody was paying attention. Brandon was already drunk. I could tell by the way he swayed. When he gestured, the volume of his voice climbing with each beer he cracked open. He was Ethan's best friend from college, the guy who still thought keg stands were the peak of human achievement, who measured friendship by how many embarrassing stories he could tell about you in public. He'd never liked me, or maybe he just didn't see me. Either way, every story he told seemed designed to remind the room that he'd known Ethan longer, understood him better, had claimed to a version of him I'd never access. I was back in the kitchen slicing more cheddar when I heard the door open again. I didn't need to look to know it was Leela. I could tell by the shift in Ethan's voice, the way it went softer, warmer, different. I glanced up from the cutting board. She stood in the doorway, wearing a black wrap dress that looked like it belonged at a cocktail party downtown, not a casual loft gathering. Her hair fell in perfect waves. Her smile was confident, easy, like she'd been here 1,000 times before. Ethan crossed the room in 4 long strides. He pulled her into a hug that went on too long. His hand lingered on her lower back. He laughed, bright, effortless, and said something I couldn't hear that made him grin. I looked down at the cheese knife in my hand and focused on the motion. Thin slices, even cuts, breathe. Jealousy was unattractive. Jealousy was unfair. I was being paranoid. I repeated it like a mantra, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The kitchen suddenly felt too warm, too small. I could hear Leela's voice blending with Ethan's, his friends, greeting her like she was part of the inner circle. He probably was. She'd known them all longer than I had. When I finally carried the refilled board back to the living room, Leela was sitting on my sofa. Ethan sat beside her, his arm draped casually along the back cushions, not touching her directly, but close, too close. I set the board down on the coffee table, and no one even glanced at it. The music got louder. Conversations grew more animated. I drifted through my own home like I was invisible, collecting empty bottles, smiling when someone thanked me, feeling lonelier than I'd ever felt, surrounded by people. Then Brandon stood up. He was swaying, gripping his beer bottle like it was keeping him upright. Hey, hey, everybody, he shouted over the music. I want to make a toast. A few people turned. The volume dropped slightly. My stomach tightened without knowing why. Ethan laughed from the sofa. Brandon, man, sit down. No, this is important. Brandon raised his bottle higher, grinning like he was about to deliver the performance of the night. To Ethan and Marissa, a couple of people lifted their drinks. I felt heat crawl up my neck, unsure whether to smile or disappear into the kitchen. 2 people who prove, Brandon continued, his words slurring slightly, that love can survive anything, even Ethan's backup plan. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. I went completely still. Cheese knife was still in my hand. Forgotten. Brandon turned toward Leela, pointing at her with his bottle, his grin widening. Come on, we all know it. If Marissa ever bails, Leela's been waiting in the wings since high school. Right, he raised his drink higher, his voice booming now. Backup fiancé always. Ready, the laughter came louder this time. Harper, someone whistled, someone else clapped, and Leela didn't look horrified, she didn't object, she smiled. It was small, almost shy, but unmistakably pleased, like she'd been waiting years for someone to finally say it out loud. I looked at Ethan. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at her, and his face did something I tried to convince myself I'd imagined 100 times before, softened. The same way it used to soften in the early days when he looked at me before. Everything became routine and comfortable and taken for granted. Tenderness I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Then he laughed. It wasn't a shut it down laugh. It wasn't an uncomfortable, this has gone too far laugh. It was just a laugh, like it was funny, like Brandon's joke was harmless, like I didn't matter enough to defend. The room kept moving around me. People went back to their conversations. The music swelled again. Someone grabbed another beer from the cooler, but I felt like I'd gone underwater, sound muffled, vision tunneled, my chest went tight. I set the cheese knife down on the counter, very carefully, like if I moved too fast I might shatter. Then I walked fully deliberately through the crowd. Conversations stuttered as I passed. People noticed, eyes tracked my movement. I could feel the shift in the room, the sudden awareness that something was happening. I reached into my jacket pocket, the one draped over the chair by the door, and pulled out the small velvet box, the one I'd been carrying all night, the one I'd planned to show off later with a laugh, making a joke about how perfectly us it was. I held it in my palm, feeling the weight. $120. Cubic zirconia, hammered silver, the cheapest engagement ring any woman I knew had ever received, and about to become the most expensive thing I'd ever owned, because it was going to cost me relationship, a future, an entire imagined life. I walked straight to Leela. She looked up, her smile faded. Her eyes went wide. I opened the box. The ring caught the Edison bulb light, glinting dully. Go ahead, I said. My voice was steady, come terrifyingly even. He's yours now. I placed the box directly in her hand. The room went completely silent, not awkward silence, true silence, the kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. Leela stared at the ring, her face cycling through shock, confusion, dawning horror. Marissa. I didn't, you didn't, what? I interrupted softly. Didn't mean it. Didn't know. I smiled, and I could feel how sharp it was, or didn't think I'd actually hear it. Ethan shoved through the crowd, his face going red. Marissa. What the hell are you doing? I turned to him slowly, ending the audition. His jaw dropped. It was a joke, was it? I looked around the room at all the faces staring back, because everyone here seemed to think it was pretty funny. Even you. You're overreacting. No, I said, and my voice dropped too. Something cold and final. I'm done reacting. I walked to the door and opened it wide. Party's over, I said. Everyone out. Nobody moved. Brandon muttered something. Come on, she's just out. I repeated louder. They started shuffling toward the exit. Some looked apologetic, some looked annoyed, most just looked uncomfortable, eager to escape whatever mess this had become. Leela stood frozen, still clutching the ring box like it might explode in her hands. Keep it, I said when she tried to give it back. Apparently you've been waiting long enough. Ethan grabbed my arm as the last person squeezed through the doorway. You just humiliated me in front of everyone. I yanked free. Funny, that's exactly how I felt when Your best friend called another woman. Your backup fiancé, and you laughed. It wasn't like that. Then what was it? Like Ethan, my voice cracked for the first time because from where I stood, it looked like everyone in that room knew something I was too stupid to see. He stared at me, mouth opening and closing, searching for words that wouldn't come. I stepped back and closed the door in his face. The lock clicked. The silence that followed pressed against my skin like a physical weight. I stood there back against the door, looking at the wreckage, half empty. Glasses on every surface, abandoned. Napkins, the charcuterie board barely touched, Edison bulbs still twinkling. Mocking me with their warmth, I walked slowly to the coffee table, the ring box. Sat there, Leela must have dropped it. Before she ran, I picked it up and opened it, stared at the dull silver circle inside. After a long moment, I whispered to the empty room, "Best $120 I ever spent." The pounding started less than 10 minutes after I locked the door. "Marissa, open up. We need to talk about this." Ethan's voice came through the wood, thick with alcohol and desperation. I could hear the slur in his words, the edge of panic underneath the anger. I stayed where I was, standing in the middle of my loft, surrounded by half-empty wine glasses and abandoned plates. Marissa, louder this time, more insistent than other voices, joined in. Brandon, Kyle, maybe two others I couldn't identify. "Come on. Marissa, you're being crazy. He didn't do anything wrong. It was just a joke." Their voices overlapped, building into a chorus of indignation, all of them convinced I was the problem, that I'd overreacted, that I'd ruined a perfectly good night over nothing. I walked to the sofa, sat down, and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my podcast app until I found exactly what I was looking for, a financial independence podcast I'd been meaning to listen to. Episode title, Building Wealth Through Autonomy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I put in my earbuds, pressed play, and let a calm woman's voice talk about investment strategies and emergency funds while Ethan and his friends shouted on the other side of my door. There was something strangely powerful about it, about refusing to engage, about letting them exhaust themselves against my silence while I sat there learning about index funds and retirement planning. They kept at it for maybe 20 minutes, pounding, shouting, demanding I be reasonable. Then I heard Brandon's voice, louder than the rest. "Dude, I think she's calling the cops." I wasn't, but the threat was enough. The hallway went quiet. I heard shuffling, muttered cursing, the sound of the elevator doors opening and closing, then nothing. I sat there for another few minutes just to be sure before pulling out my earbuds. The silence in my loft felt enormous, suffocating and liberating all at once. I stood up and started moving through the rooms, turning off the Edison bulbs, one by one, collecting abandoned glasses and plates, wiping down surfaces. My hands moved on autopilot while my brain cataloged everything around me. The vintage record player in the corner. His, the throw blanket on the sofa. Mine, the coffee table books about architecture. His, the framed print above the desk. Mine, 5 years of a shared life, and I was already dividing it into 2 separate columns. His, my. What stays, what goes. I didn't sleep that night, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone face down on the nightstand, feeling the weight of what I'd done settling over me like a heavy blanket. I woke up to 73 notifications. The number glowed on my screen when I finally picked up my phone at 7:00 a.m. Squinting against the morning light coming through the windows, Texts, missed calls, voicemails, all of them. From the same rotating cast of people. I made coffee first, strong black, the kind that burns going down. Then I sat on the sofa and started reading. Ethan's messages came in waves, the tone shifting with each one. I can't believe you did that. You humiliated me in front of everyone. It was a joke, Marissa. You have serious trust issues. Then the guilt tripping started. You're throwing away 4 years over nothing. I thought you were better than this. Everyone thinks you're unstable. And finally, the manipulation. I'm staying at Brandon's. Hope you're happy. My mom's devastated. She can't believe you do this to our family. I scrolled through them all, watching the pattern repeat. Anger, guilt, manipulation, anger again. There were messages from his friends, too. Brandon predictably telling me I'd overreacted. Kyle saying I owed Ethan an apology. Someone named Derek I barely remembered meeting, calling me dramatic. Then there was Leela. Marissa, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please call me. I stared at that one for a long time. She didn't mean for it to happen, as if she'd had no control over smiling when Brandon made his backup fiancé joke, as if she'd had no choice but to sit there looking pleased while my relationship imploded. I deleted it without responding. The worst message, though, came from Victoria. Ethan's mother had always been polite to me, that particular way wealthy women are when they're barely tolerating your presence. Tight smiles, backhanded compliments about my bohemian style or my quaint loft. Her text was short and brutal. I always knew you had a vindictive streak. Ethan deserves better than this humiliation. I read it twice, let the sting of it settle, then did something that felt better than anything I'd done in months. I started blocking numbers. Walked, Brandon walked, Finn walked, Kyle, Derek, and 3 other people whose names I barely knew. Blocked. Blocked. Owner. I hovered over her name for a second, then pressed the button. Blocked. Each tap made me feel lighter, free. By the time I finished my coffee, my phone was silent. At 9:00 a.m., I called a locksmith. Safeguard security, a gruff voice answered. Hi, I need all my locks changed today, if possible. There was a pause. The sound of typing. We can have someone there by 10. Address. I gave it to him. Any particular reason for the rush? He asked. Not unkindly. Bad breakup, I said. Simply, yeah, we can do that. Guy named Tom will be there in an hour. Tom arrived at exactly 10:00. Broad-shouldered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a toolbox that looked like it had seen decades of use. You're the bad breakup? He asked, setting down his equipment. That's me, he nodded, already examining the existing lock. You'd be surprised how many of these calls we get. Smart move, changing them fast saves a lot of trouble down the line. I watched him work the methodical way. He removed the old hardware, installed the new deadbolt, tested it multiple times to make sure it was secure. This one's high security, he said, showing me the mechanism. Costs a little extra, but it's worth it. Can't be picked easy, can't be bumped. Somebody wants in, they're going to need your key or a battering ram. Perfect, I said when he handed me the new keys. I felt something shift, something final. This was my space now, fully, completely mine. After Tom left, I stood in the middle of my loft and looked around. It didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a crime scene, evidence of a life I'd believed in scattered across every surface. I grabbed a stack of boxes from the storage closet and got to work. Clothes first. I pulled everything of Ethan's out of the closet, off the hangers, out of the dresser drawers. T-shirts that still smelled like his. Cologne, jeans I'd washed 100 times, the blazer he wore to job. Interviews into the box, label it. Clothes, toiletries, next, his razor. Shaving cream, the expensive face wash. He'd insisted was worth the price. All of it went into another box. Then the harder stuff, the weighted blanket he bought after reading some article about better sleep, the vintage record player he'd found at a flea market and promised to restore but never did, the collection of craft beer bottle caps he'd been saving for some vague future project. Box after box, I packed away 5 years of shared life. I labeled them with a brutal honesty that felt good in a dark way. Electronics delusions. Miscellaneous lies. I found the framed photo from 3 years ago Christmas, when I was going through the bookshelf, both of us, at my parents' house in Riverland. There. Palm tree, decorated with lights in the background, Ethan's arm around me, both of us smiling like we meant it. I stared at that photo for a long time, remembering that trip, how my parents had loved him, how happy I thought we were. I put it in the box labeled lies and kept packing. By noon I had 8 boxes stacked by the door. Then I found something I wasn't expecting. I was cleaning out his nightstand drawer when my fingers brushed against a printed email tucked beneath old receipts and charging cables. I pulled it out, a graduation card, expensive card stock, embossed flowers on the front. I opened it to the one who's always been there. Not signed, not sent, but dated 2 weeks ago. My hands started shaking, not from anger, from clarity. This wasn't a joke Brandon had made up on the spot. This wasn't some backup plan that existed only in drunk toasts. This was real, deliberate, a pattern I'd been too trusting or too afraid to see. I put the printed email in the last box and sealed it shut. The knock came around 2 that afternoon, hard, insistent, angry. I checked the peephole. Ethan looking rumpled and furious, his eyes red either from drinking or crying or both. I opened the door just wide enough to speak through the chain lock. Your key doesn't work, he said flatly. I know. I changed the locks. His eyes went wide. You what? Change the locks? This is my apartment, my name on the lease, not yours. I live here. You stayed here. I corrected. Guest privileges now revoked. His face twisted with rage. You can't just kick me out. I can, and I did. Your stuff's in the entryway. 8 boxes. You have 20 minutes. This is insane. Bring the police if you want. Bring a lawyer. My lease, my rules. He stared at me, mouthworking, searching for an argument that would land. He didn't find one. Fine, he spat, but I'm taking everything that's mine. Take what you paid for, leave what I did. I closed the door and watched through the peephole as he made trip after trip, hauling boxes down the hall, his face red with humiliation and fury. On his 4th trip he stopped. The espresso machine. He said through the door, that's mine. That's mine, I corrected. I have the receipt if you want to check. You're being petty. I'm being precise. There's a difference. He muttered something I couldn't hear and kept loading boxes. When he picked up the last one, he paused at the door one final time. You're going to regret this, Marissa. I didn't answer. I just watched him disappear into the elevator. When the doors closed, I slid the new deadbolt home and exhaled. The silence that followed was different from before. Not suffocating, pissed, quiet. I stood in the middle of my loft, finally alone, finally breathing, finally understanding something I should have known all along. Being alone didn't scare me. What scared me was staying with someone who made me feel alone. Anyway, that night I texted my sister. "You were right about him." Her response came in seconds. "I'm sorry, but I'm also proud of you." I smiled and put my phone face down on the counter. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my sofa in the silence, just me and the city lights outside my window. And for the first time in 5 years, that felt like enough. 2 days passed without a word from Ethan. 2 quiet, almost peaceful days where I started to believe maybe it was actually over. Maybe he'd accepted it. Maybe he'd moved on. I worked on a logo redesign for a new client, a local bookstore looking to rebrand. I took long walks around the neighborhood. I cooked an actual dinner. Pasta with vegetables I'd bought at the farmer's market and ate it at my table. Instead of standing over the sink, I even slept through the night. Then my phone rang Wednesday morning at 10:00. "Marissa, hi, it's Karen, my building manager." Her tone was careful, apologetic. I sat up straighter on the sofa. "Hey, Karen, what's up? Listen, I'm calling because, well, it's a little awkward. We got some complaints about your unit." Ice ran through my veins. "Complaints? Yeah, anonymous ones, which is weird. 2 of them, actually. One about domestic disturbances, screaming, fighting, that kind of thing. Another about strange chemical smells coming from your vents." I closed my eyes. "Anonymous? Yeah, honestly, Marissa, I don't believe either of them. You've been here 5 years, never a single issue. But corporate's requiring me to follow up. They're asking for a wellness check. And if we get another complaint, they'll consider it a community safety violation." The words landed like stones in my stomach. "It's Ethan," I said flatly. "It has to be Karen." I figured. "Look, I'm on your side here. But my hands are tied. Corporate sees multiple complaints, they panic. You know how it is." I did know. I also knew exactly what Ethan was doing. He couldn't control me anymore, so he was trying to control my home, my stability, my sense of safety. "I understand," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll handle it. I'm sorry, Marissa." Really? After we hung up, I sat very still on my sofa, staring at the coffee table, my phone still in my hand. This wasn't heartbreak. This wasn't a man struggling to let go. This was retaliation, calculated and deliberate. He was trying to make me homeless, trying to punish me for having the nerve to walk away. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, feeling the weight of it, the unfairness, the sheer vindictiveness. Then I called Sarah. We met at our usual cafe, a corner spot 3 blocks from my loft with mismatched furniture and the best iced coffee in the neighborhood. Sarah was already there when I arrived, sitting at our regular table by the window. She took one look at my face and stood up. "What happened?" I told her. Everything. The anonymous complaints, the wellness check, the threat of a safety violation. Her expression went from concerned to furious in about 3 seconds. "He's trying to make you homeless," she said, her voice low and sharp. "That's not heartbreak, Marissa. That's abuse." The word hit me harder than I expected. Abuse. I'd never thought of it that way. Ethan had never hit me, never screamed at me, never done any of the obvious things you see in movies, but this calculated campaign to destabilize me, to take away my home, my peace, my sense of safety. Sarah was right. She pulled out her phone, fingers moving fast across the screen. "I'm texting you someone's number, Elena Brooks." She handled my Second divorce, and she's a pit bull. Expensive but worth every penny. My phone buzzed. I looked down at the contact information. You need someone who scares him more than he scares you. Sarah said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. And Marissa, you don't owe him kindness. You don't owe him the benefit of the doubt. You owe yourself protection. Something in me shifted when she said that. I'd spent the last 2 days second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd overreacted at the party, wondering if I should have handled it differently, more privately, less dramatically, but sitting there with Sarah, hearing her name, what was happening, I felt something I hadn't felt since that night, clarity. I wasn't the one who'd done anything wrong, and I was done defending myself in my own mind. Elena Brooks's office was in a glass high-rise downtown, all modern lines and floor-toseling windows overlooking the city. I arrived at 2 p.m. the next day, nerves making my hands shake slightly as I rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The receptionist showed me into a sleek conference room. Elena appeared a moment later, late 40s, sharp blazer hair pulled back in a non-nonsense bun. She shook my hand with a grip that meant business. Marissa, Sarah speaks highly of you. Have a seat. I sat. She sat across from me, pulled out a legal pad and clicked her pen. Tell me everything from the beginning. So I did. I told her about the engagement party, about Brandon's toast, about handing the ring to Leela, about the pounding on my door, the block numbers, the changed locks, Ethan collecting his things, and then I told her about the anonymous complaints. Elena didn't interrupt once. She just took notes, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp, tracking every detail. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Classic retaliation behavior, she said simply. He's trying to destabilize you because you took away his control. The anonymous complaints are designed to threaten your housing, your stability, your sense of safety. Hearing her say it so matter-of-factly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. We're going to formalize this, Elena continued. Cease and desist letter, certified mail. We'll send it to Ethan and to anyone else who was present that night who might continue the harassment. I blinked. Like who? The friend who made the toast, the woman who was supposedly the backup, anyone who's been in contact with you since the breakup, trying to pressure you or defend him. Brandon Finn. We make it clear that any further contact, direct or indirect, will be treated as grounds for legal action, harassment, defamation. If the false complaints continue, we create a paper trail. She started typing on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. This is going to cost you about $420 for the consultation and service. Worth it? I didn't hesitate. Yes, he nodded, still typing. Good. Is men like this? They back off when they realize you're not afraid, when they realize you have documentation and legal representation. They thrive on making you react. We're going to take that power away. She printed out the letter 20 minutes later and read portions of it aloud. The language was precise, terrifying even. It detailed the false police report Ethan had essentially filed by bringing officers to my door. It named the anonymous complaints as harassment. It warned that any further contact, direct or indirect, would be documented and treated as evidence. Potential civil litigation. Will send copies to Ethan, Brandon, and Leela. Elena said, all certified mail, requiring signatures. They'll know you're serious. I signed the authorization forms, wrote a check for $420. As I handed it over, Elena gave me a look that was half empathy, half. Admiration, you're doing the right thing, she said. A lot of people in your position just try to wait it out. Hope. It stops, but hope isn't a strategy. Documentation is. When I got home, I sat down at my laptop and drafted an email to Karen and building management. Kept it clean, professional, factual. I summarized the situation. My ex-partner removed from the residence after the relationship ended, was now filing false anonymous complaints in retaliation. I attached a copy of the cease and desist letter. I made it clear that I took these false reports seriously, that I had legal representation, and that any further complaints should be immediately forwarded to me and my attorney. I copied building management's corporate office, then I read it over 3 times, making sure every word was right, and I hit send. The moment the email went through, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was acting, documenting, protecting, building a case. I called Vanessa that night, sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights flickering below. I hired a lawyer. I told her. There was a pause, then her voice came through, fierce and proud. That's my girl. You're not the victim. Here, Marissa, you're the one who walked away. Don't you forget that. I smiled, looking out at the city. I won't. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, feeling the cool night air on my face, the weight of the last few days settling into something manageable. Ethan had wanted to make me afraid, to make me doubt myself, to make me regret leaving. That he'd made me stronger, and I wasn't backing down. The silence that followed was unnerving. 3 days passed after Alina sent the cease and desist letters, then 4, then 5. No texts, no calls, no angry pounding on my door, no new complaints to Karen, nothing. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Ethan to do something dramatic and vindictive, but the quiet stretched on like held breath. I found myself checking my phone compulsively. Every notification made my heart jump. Every unknown number made my stomach clench. I'd open my email expecting threats or angry messages and find only work, correspondence, and promotional emails from stores I'd shopped at once. The paranoia was worse than the actual harassment had been. At least when he was actively retaliating, I knew what I was dealing with. The silence felt like strategy, like he was planning something I couldn't see coming, but slowly, cautiously, I started returning to normal. I opened the windows one morning, letting fresh air sweep through the loft for the first time in weeks. I put on music while I worked. Nothing sad, just upbeat indie pop that made the space feel lighter. I cooked actual meals, chicken and roasted vegetables, pasta with homemade sauce, things that required more than a microwave and actually tasted good. My freelance work picked back up too. A new client reached out, a small bakery in the neighborhood looking to rebrand. The owner, a woman named Emma with flour perpetually dusting her apron, wanted something warm and inviting, something that felt like home. I threw myself into the project, sketching logos, playing with color palettes, losing myself. The creative problem solving that had drawn me to design in the first place. It felt almost foreign after weeks of emotional warfare, like I'd forgotten what normal felt like. One afternoon, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I realized I'd gone an entire hour without thinking about Ethan. A full hour. Sunlight was streaming through the tall windows, catching dust motes in the air. My laptop was open on the counter, displaying 3 logo variations for the bakery, Music played softly from my speaker, and I felt not happy exactly. Not healed, but okay. It felt like a small victory. I ran into Mrs. Lee. The hallway a few days later. I was carrying groceries up from the lobby when I saw her at her door, struggling with her keys while balancing a canvas bag. Here, let me help, I said, setting my bags down and taking hers, while she unlocked her door. Oh, Marissa. Thank you, dear. She pushed the door open and took her bag back, then paused. I noticed the locksmith the other day. And the boxes, everything all right. I hesitated, then surprised myself by saying, would you like to come in for tea? Her eyes brightened. I'd love that. 10 minutes later, we were sitting in my kitchen, a tiny space barely big enough for the bistro table. I'd squeezed in, drinking chamomile tea from mismatched mugs. I gave her the edited version, the engagement, the party, the joke that wasn't really a joke, the decision to end it. Mrs. Lee listened without interrupting, her wrinkled hands wrapped around her mug, her eyes sharp and knowing. When I finished, she nodded slowly. I was married 45 years before my husband died, she said, and you know what I learned. A man who truly loves you never makes you feel like you're waiting in line. The words hit me harder than I expected. You did right, she continued, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Sometimes the bravest thing is walking away from what everyone says you should want. I felt tears prick my eyes and blinked them back. Thank you, I said quietly. He squeezed my hand once more. You're going to be just fine, dear. I can tell. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the two empty mugs, feeling something settle inside me. Mrs. Lee had lived an entire marriage, 45 years. She'd loved and lost and survived, and she thought I'd done the right thing. That validation from someone who'd actually lived it, not just theorized about relationships from the sidelines, meant more than anything my friends had said. It gave me permission to trust my own judgment, to believe that walking away wasn't weakness, it was strength. A week after the cease and desist went out, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My stomach clenched. Automatically, I stared at the notification on my screen, debating whether to open it or just delete it. Curiosity won. Hey, it's Leela. I sat up straighter on the sofa, my jaw tightening. The message continued. I'm out. He's crazy. He wanted me to call your landlord again. Say I saw drugs in your apartment. I'm done being part of this. I'm sorry for everything. I read it 3 times, feeling rage build with each pass. She was out. She was done being part of this, like she'd been an unwilling participant, like she hadn't smiled at Brandon's backup fiancé joke, like she hadn't been texting Ethan at midnight for months, like she hadn't been waiting in the wings just like Brandon said, and now she wanted me to know she'd almost filed another false report but decided not to, and somehow that made her a good person. He was sorry for everything, as if a text message could undo the humiliation, the betrayal, the months of gaslighting myself into believing I was paranoid for noticing what everyone apparently already knew. I stared at the message, my hands shaking slightly, imagining all the things I could say. I could tell her exactly what I thought of her apology. I could ask her how long she'd been waiting for Ethan to be single. I could point out that being done being part of this only happened after she got a legal letter, not after any actual moral epiphany. But as I sat there, thumb hovering over the keyboard, I realized something. Leela's guilt wasn't my problem to manage. Her Conscience wasn't my responsibility. I didn't owe her forgiveness or understanding or even acknowledgement. The conversation was over. I took a screenshot of the message evidence in case and archived it in a folder labeled legal. Then I deleted the text. Without replying, it felt better than anything I could have said. The next morning, my phone rang, a known number. Again, I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello, Marissa. It's Richard, Ethan's father, of course. It was. I sat down slowly on my sofa, my free hand gripping the armrest. Mr. Caldwell, I said evenly. What can I do for you? His voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of a man used to negotiating to getting his way through. Charm rather than force. I know things ended badly between you and Ethan. I'm not calling to get involved in all that. But he mentioned you still have his espresso machine, the one he uses every morning. He's been having terrible back pain without it, and I thought maybe we could work something out. I almost laughed. The espresso machine, not an apology for his son's behavior, not concern about the harassment, just a request to return a possession Ethan claimed to need. The espresso machine I bought, I said calmly, with my credit card, the one Ethan promised to reimburse me for but never did. Silence. On the other end, I continued, my voice steady. It cost $370. I'd be happy to leave it in the hallway for him the moment I receive payment. $370. Richard's voice had an edge now. For a use machine. For my machine, I corrected that he wants back. Another long pause. I could practically hear him calculating, deciding if this was worth the fight. Fine, he said finally. I'll Venmo you. That works. I gave him my Venmo handle and hung up. 2 minutes later, my phone pinged. Richard Caldwell paid you $370 for espresso machine. I pulled the machine from the cabinet where I'd stored it, carried it to the hallway, and set it down outside my door. Then I went back inside, sent Richard a text. It's in the hallway, and locked my door. I stood at my peephole waiting. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped out, moving stiffly, his face carefully neutral. He picked up the machine without looking at my door, without pausing, without any acknowledgement that I might be watching. He got back in the elevator. The doors closed and he was gone. I stepped back from the peephole and smiled. He'd finally paid me $370 to make me disappear from his life, and I'd never been happier to be bought out. I walked to my sofa, sat down and looked around my loft, quiet. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. No late-night texts asking where I was, no passive-aggressive comments about how I spent my time, no feeling like I needed to justify watching a show Ethan thought was stupid or ordering food he claimed was too spicy. I slept diagonally across the bed, limbs sprawled in every direction, taking up all the space I wanted. I watched 3 seasons of a British baking show. Ethan had always rolled his eyes at eating ice cream straight from the container. At midnight, I ordered Thai food with extra chili and ate it on my sofa without anyone complaining about the smell. Small pleasures, tiny freedoms, they added up to something that felt like peace. My work picked up too. The bakery branding project led to a referral, which led to another client, which led to the email that changed everything professionally. A local nonprofit called Hope and Harvest, focused on urban community gardens, reached out asking if I'd be interested in a full rebrand. logo, website, promotional materials, a 6-month contract with the possibility of ongoing work. I met with their creative director, a woman named Rachel with silver streaks in her hair and paint-stained hands, who ran the organization like a loving dictatorship. She'd gone through my portfolio carefully, asking questions about my process, my inspiration, why I'd made certain design choices. At the end of the meeting, she'd leaned back in her chair and smiled. "You have a distinctive eye for authentic storytelling," she said. "Most designers try too hard to be clever. You just tell the truth. That's rare." I signed the contract 2 days later. The work was challenging in the best way, creative, problem solving that required me to think differently, to push past the safe choices and find something real. It reminded me why I'd fallen in love with design in the first place. One weekend, I drove out to visit Vanessa and the twins. The boys were 6 now, chaotic bundles of energy who turned her house into a playground of scattered toys and shouted negotiations. I spent the afternoon building block towers they immediately destroyed, reading the same picture book 17 times and pretending to be a monster they could defeat with foam swords. After they went to bed, Vanessa and I sat in her kitchen drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She watched me over the rim of her mug, her eyes sharp in that way only sisters' eyes can be. "You look different," she said finally. "Different how?" "Lighter, like you've been carrying something heavy." And finally put it down. I thought about that, turned it over in my mind. He was right. The weight I'd been carrying wasn't just the relationship, it was the constant effort of making myself smaller, of editing my opinions to match his, of pretending Thai food wasn't my favorite because he didn't like it, of skipping shows I wanted to watch because he'd make comments that drained all the joy out of them. I'd spent 5 years shrinking to fit into the space Ethan had decided I should occupy, and now, alone in my loft, I was expanding back to my actual size. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think you're right." Vanessa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Good, you deserve to take up space, Marissa. All of it." The text from Jenna came on a Tuesday evening. I was working on the Hope and Harvest logo, playing with different arrangements of leaves and text when my phone buzzed on the desk. Jenna and I had been friends in college, stayed close for a few years after, then drifted apart when I started dating Ethan. It wasn't deliberate, just the slow erosion that happens when someone new takes up all your time and energy. I hadn't heard from her in at least a year. "Thought you should know Ethan and Leela are together officially. Started dating like 2 weeks after you broke up. Sorry." I stared at the message, waiting for the pain to hit, the betrayal, the confirmation that I'd been right to suspect, right to worry, right to feel like something was wrong. But what came instead was something unexpected. Relief. I texted back, "Thanks for telling me." Then I sat with it, 2 weeks after we broke up, which meant they'd gotten together almost immediately, which meant the feelings had been there all along, simmering beneath every "she's like a sister" excuse, every midnight text, every too long hug, which meant every time Ethan had dismissed my concerns, told me I was being paranoid, made me feel crazy for noticing he'd been lying. The printed email I'd found in his drawer suddenly made perfect sense to the one who's always been there, not unsent, because he'd changed his mind, unsent, because he was waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to be out of the picture, The backup plan wasn't a joke. It was always the real plan. I was just too trusting to see it. I called Sarah. Rooftop bar. 1 hour, I'm buying, I said. When she picked up, that good or that bad, honestly, I'm not sure yet. We met at a place downtown with string lights and a view of the city skyline. Sarah was already there when I arrived. 2 glasses of wine on the table. Talk, she said, sliding one toward me. I told her about Jenna's text, about Ethan and Leela, about the timeline. Sarah's expression shifted from surprise to something closer to vindication. I knew he was a coward, she said, shaking her head. Couldn't even break up with you before moving on. Had to keep you around as the safety net while he figured out if she'd actually want him. I took a long sip of wine, letting that sink in. The backup fiancé joke, I said slowly. At the party, Brandon wasn't making it up. Everyone knew. They all knew he had feelings for her. That's why Leela smiled like that. That's why Ethan looked at her that way. Sarah reached across the table and gripped my hand. And that's why you walked across that room and handed her the ring. Because somewhere deep down you knew too. I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. Sarah raised her glass. 2 men who do you the favor of showing you who they are, and to women who are smart enough to believe them. I clinkegged my glass against hers and drank. Something shifted in that moment. The narrative in my head changed. It wasn't I was humiliated at my own engagement party. It was I escaped before I married the wrong person. Ethan and Leela getting together wasn't a betrayal. It was confirmation. Every instinct I'd ignored, every concern I'd talked myself out of, every moment I'd felt like something was wrong. I'd been right all along. That night I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine, looking out at the city lights flickering against the dark sky. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel before. Possibility. Not the possibility of getting back together, not the possibility of closure or apologies or explanations, just possibility. Open-ended and undefined. The future stretched out in front of me, no longer tethered to Ethan's timeline or Ethan's plans or Ethan's version of what our life should look like. I thought back to the engagement party, to that moment of walking through the crowd with the ring in my hand, every eye on me, every conversation dying mid-sentence. It felt terrifying, powerful, final. I thought it was an ending, but standing here now, I understood it differently. It wasn't just ending a relationship. It was reclaiming my own life, my own narrative, my own right to be more than someone's backup plan. I finished my wine and went back inside. That's when I saw it, the velvet box sitting on my bookshelf where it had been for weeks. Leela must have dropped it in her panic to leave, and I'd never bothered to throw it away. I picked it up and opened it. The ring caught the amber glow of the streetlights outside, glinting weakly. $120, cubic zirconia, hammered silver. Ironic, Ethan had called it. I turned it over in my fingers, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Then I grabbed my jacket and walked downstairs. The vintage shop on the corner had a donation bin outside filled with old jewelry, clothing, random household items people wanted gone but couldn't quite throw away. I stood there for a moment holding the box. Then I dropped it in. Someone else can laugh about it, I whispered. Someone who still believes in irony. The box disappeared among other people's discarded treasures, and just like that it was gone. No longer a symbol of anything I wanted to remember, just another cheap ring someone thought meant something. Once, I walked back upstairs unlocked my door and stepped into my loft. It was quiet. And for the first time since this whole thing started, that silence didn't scare me, sounded like freedom. Months that followed felt like learning. To live in my own skin again, I started small, rearranging furniture so the sofa faced the windows instead of the TV, moving my desk to catch the morning light, buying new throw pillows in colors I actually liked, deep emerald and burnt orange instead of the neutral grays Ethan had preferred because they were more sophisticated. I hung new art on the walls, a print from a local artist showing the city skyline in abstract watercolors, a vintage poster from a bookstore I loved, things that made the space feel like mine, not ours. The Hope and Harvest contract turned into steady work. Rachel, the creative director, became more than just a client. She'd invite me to their community garden work days where I'd spend Saturday mornings pulling weeds and planting tomatoes alongside volunteers who talked about soil, composition, and heirloom seeds with the kind of passion I usually reserved for color theory. One evening, Rachel invited me to a gallery opening in the arts district. You should meet people, she'd said when I hesitated. Actual people, not just me and my kombucha brewing gardeners. I went. The gallery was packed with artists and designers, musicians and writers, all of them talking over wine and cheese about projects and collaborations and ideas. Rachel introduced me to a photographer who needed branding for her studio, a muralist looking for someone to design promotional materials, a sculptor who just wanted to talk about negative space and composition. I realized standing there with a glass of cheap red wine how small my social circle had become. During my relationship with Ethan, how I'd let friendships fade because he didn't like my friends, or because they didn't fit into his world, or because it was just easier to exist in the narrow bubble of his life. A week later, I signed up for a weekend drawing class at the community center. I'd always wanted to take one back in college before I'd pivoted to graphic design. I'd loved drawing, charcoal sketches, figure studies, anything that required just paper in my hands. Ethan had called it a waste of time when I mentioned it once. You already know how to draw. Why pay money to do something you can do at home? But it wasn't about learning a skill. It was about creating something with no commercial purpose, no client brief, no deadline, just the quiet satisfaction of charcoal on paper, of making something because I wanted to. The class was small, 6 of us, ranging from a retired accountant to a college student to a woman in her late 50s who decided to try something new after her kids moved out. Our instructor, a bearded man named David with paint permanently under his fingernails, didn't care if we were good. He just cared if we tried. Art isn't about being perfect, he said during our first session. It's about being honest. I drew a still life of coffee cups and wilted flowers and felt something in my chest. A knot. I ran into Brandon on a random Tuesday at a coffee shop downtown. I was waiting for my latte, scrolling through emails on my phone when I felt someone staring. I looked up. Brandon stood near the door, frozen mid-step, his face cycling through recognition and discomfort. Our eyes met. He hesitated, clearly debating whether to pretend he hadn't seen me, then seemed to decide that would be worse. He approached my table slowly, like I might bolt. Marissa. Hey, can I talk to you for a minute? I looked at him for a long moment, then gestured to the empty chair across from me. He sat, hands wrapped Around his own coffee cup, not quite. Meeting my eyes, I owe you an apology. He said finally, for that night. The toast, I was drunk and I didn't realize how it would sound. I didn't mean to hurt you. I studied his face, saw genuine embarrassment there, maybe even shame, but I also saw something else. Something that told me his regret wasn't really about hurting me. It was about how it had made him look. You meant every word, I said quietly. You just didn't expect me to hear it. Brandon opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. His shoulders sagged slightly. He nodded, just once. Yeah, he said. I guess you're right. He stood up, tucked his chair back in, and left. Without another word, I watched him go, feeling nothing but a mild sense of closure. The barista called my name. I picked up my latte and went back to my emails. My mother called a few days later. I saw her name on my screen and almost didn't answer. We'd spoken briefly since the breakup, surface level conversations about weather and work, but nothing real. I picked up. Marissa. Honey, do you have a minute? Sure, Mom. What's up? There was a pause, the kind that meant she'd been building up to this conversation for a while. Why didn't you tell me about Ethan? Her voice was hurt, confused. I had to hear from Vanessa that you two broke up 5 months ago. Why wouldn't you tell your own mother? I closed my eyes, leaning back against my sofa. It was complicated. Mom, complicated how? Did you even give him a chance to explain? Did you consider therapy? Marissa, relationships take work. You can't just throw away good man over a misunderstanding. The old impulse rose up to defend myself, to explain, to justify my choices until she understood, but something in me had changed. I didn't need her to understand. I just needed to tell the truth. He had feelings for someone else. I said simply, I wasn't going to wait around to be his second choice. Silence. Long and heavy, then a sight. You're stronger than I was at your age. My mother said finally, her voice softer. I stayed in things I should have left. I thought that was what you were supposed to do. Something in my chest loosened. I love you, Mom. I love you too, honey. We hung up, and I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of that conversation. Settle, we'd never fully agree. She'd probably always think I should have tried harder, should have been more patient, should have fought for it, but for the first time, I was okay with that distance. Her choices weren't mine to carry. I saw them together on a Saturday morning at the farmer's market. I'd gone early the way I always did, basket in hand, mentally planning what vegetables I'd actually cook this week. I was browsing the heirloom tomatoes when I saw them across the aisle, Ethan and Leela together. My heart kicked up, automatic and unwelcome. My first instinct was to turn around to leave, to avoid the awkwardness, but then something stubborn in me said no. This was my market, my Saturday tradition. I wasn't going to alter my path for them. I kept walking. They were at the flower stall, Leela holding a bouquet of sunflowers while Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back, the same way it used to rest on mine. I waited for the pain to hit, the jealousy, the betrayal. Instead, I felt only a mild curiosity. I wondered how long it would last, whether she'd eventually notice the same things I had, the way he dismissed her opinions, the way he made everything about him, the way he needed to be the center of every room. Leela saw me first. Her eyes went wide, panic flickered across her face. She touched Ethan's arm. Quick, urgent gesture. He turned. Our eyes met across the market. It was strange, like seeing someone I used to Know in a dream, recognition without connection, familiarity without feeling. I nodded once, polite, impersonal. Then I turned to the herb vendor and bought basil and rosemary, asking about the best way to keep them fresh, listening to her detailed explanation about trimming stems and changing water. The normally of the transaction felt like victory. When I glanced back, they were gone. I finished my shopping, bought a bouquet of wildflowers for myself, and walked home through the sun-dappled streets, feeling lighter than I had in years. That afternoon, I arranged the flowers in a vase on my kitchen counter, made pasta with the basil I'd bought, and ate it on my balcony while watching the city move below. The sky was clear. The air was warm. My loft was quiet, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't waiting for anything. I wasn't waiting for Ethan to change. Wasn't waiting for closure. Wasn't waiting for someone else to validate my choices. I was just here living, moving forward, building something new from the pieces of what I'd left behind, and it felt like enough. 8 months after the engagement party, I woke up on a Saturday morning to silence, not the oppressive kind, not the lonely kind. Just quiet, soft autumn light filtered through my windows, turning everything in the loft golden. I stretched across the bed, still sleeping diagonally, still taking up all the space I wanted, and felt nothing but contentment. I made coffee the way I liked it, strong with just a splash of oat milk. No compromise, no one commenting that it was too bitter or suggesting I try something sweeter. I carried my mug out to the balcony, wrapped in my favorite oversized sweater, the one with the holes in the sleeves that Ethan had always said made me look like a college student. I loved that sweater. The city was waking up beneath me, early joggers on the sidewalks, a few cars passing, the coffee shop on the corner just turning on its lights. I sat there, watching it all, and realized something. I hadn't checked my phone compulsively in weeks, hadn't wondered what Ethan was doing, or who he was with, or whether he thought about me. I just didn't care anymore. The anxiety that had lived in my chest for months, maybe years, was gone. I pulled out my phone not to check for messages, but to look at my calendar. Brunch with Sarah at 11:00. Drawing class at 2:00. Maybe swing by Vanessa's in the evening if I felt like the drive. A full day, a full life. It looked nothing like what I'd imagined. When Ethan and I were planning our future together, it looked better, more authentic, more mine. I finished my coffee and went inside to get ready. I met Nathan at a cafe near the Arts District at 10:00. Rachel had introduced us at the gallery opening 4 months ago. He was a friend of her husband's, a high school English teacher with kind eyes, and a tendency to talk about his students the way other people talked about their own children. This was our 3rd time meeting up. Coffee dates that carefully weren't being called dates. Yet, though we both knew what they were becoming, Nathan was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cappuccinos waiting. I took a guess on your order, he said, standing to hook me. Oat milk, right? Perfect. Thank you. We sat and he launched immediately into a story about his sophomore class attempting to perform Romeo and Juliet. They rewrote the ending, he said, grinning. Romeo wakes up before Juliet dies. They have a very modern conversation about communication and therapy, and they decide to just run away together and start a podcast. I laughed, the kind of genuine, easy laugh that doesn't require performance or effort. Please tell me you recorded it. Oh, it's on my phone. I'll show you next. Next time, the assumption felt comfortable, natal. We talked for over an hour about his students, about my work with Hope and Harvest, about the terrible true crime documentary we'd both accidentally started watching. He listened more than he talked, asked questions, and actually waited for the answers. Never once made me feel like I was competing for his attention or justifying my opinions. When we finally left, he walked me back toward my loft, our pace slowing as we got closer. At the entrance, he paused. Can I see you again next weekend? He asked. Maybe dinner this time. I smiled. I'd like that. Good. He smiled back, hands in his pockets, not pushing for more. Text me when you're free. I watched him walk away, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, uncomplicated and easy. I didn't know where it would go. Didn't need to know. I trusted myself enough now to walk away if it stopped feeling good, and that trust felt like the biggest victory of all. That afternoon, I spread my design portfolio across my dining table. Rachel had mentioned the possibility of a partnership position at Hope and Harvest. They were expanding, looking for someone who could take on more responsibility, lead projects, help shape the organization's visual identity. Long term, she'd asked if I'd be interested. I'd said yes before I could second guess myself. Now I was preparing to pitch, to make my case, to bet on myself in a way I'd never quite managed before. I laid out my best work, the nonprofit branding that had started this whole journey, a logo series I'd done for 3 local restaurants, each one distinct but cohesive, the personal art from my drawing class, charcoal sketches, and watercolor experiments that showed range, creativity, the ability to think beyond commercial constraints. Looking at it all together, I felt something unexpected, pride. This was good work, work that was distinctly mine, unburdened by anyone else's opinions about what I should prioritize or how I should present myself. I'd found my voice, and it didn't try to please everyone. Rachel had said that was rare. I was starting to believe her. Partnership might not happen. I might pitch and face rejection, might have to try again somewhere else or keep freelancing or pivot entirely. But I'd survive it. I'd already survived worse. I'd survived a relationship that made me small, a public humiliation that could have broken me, harassment designed to destabilize my entire life, and I'd come out the other side stronger. I closed my portfolio feeling ready. Whatever came next, I could handle it. That evening, I stood on my balcony as the sun began to set. The city lights were just starting to shimmer against the darkening sky. I held a glass of wine in one hand, the cool evening air brushing against my face, and everything was quiet. No pounding on my door, no angry texts lighting up my phone, no voice in my head telling me I'd overreacted, that I'd made a mistake, that I should have handled it differently. Just silence, the kind of silence that used to terrify me. For years, I'd been afraid of being alone, afraid that if I didn't have someone, anyone, I'd be incomplete. Somehow, less than that, fear had kept me in a relationship where I was lonely. Anyway, where I spent 5 years shrinking myself to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. But standing here now, I understood something I hadn't before. Silence isn't emptiness. It's space, possibility, the room to hear your own thoughts without static, to make decisions without needing someone else's permission, to exist fully as yourself without apologizing for taking up space. I thought briefly about the engagement party, that moment of walking through the crowd with the ring in my hand, every eye on me, every conversation dying as I moved. It felt like an ending, but it was actually a beginning, the beginning of learning to trust myself, to believe my own instincts, to understand that walking away isn't weakness, it's strength. Few drops of rain began to fall soft and steady, powdering against the balcony railing. I tilted my face up, feeling the cool water on my skin. This is what freedom sounds like, I whispered to the empty air. The rain picked up, turning the city below into a shimmering watercolor. I finished my wine, watching the lights blur and soften, feeling more at peace than I'd felt in years. Then I went back inside, closing the balcony door behind me. I looked around my loft, my space, my rules, my life, the furniture I'd chosen, the art I'd hung, the silence I'd learned to love. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt completely at home, not because I had everything figured out, not because the future was certain, but because I'd learned to trust myself enough to figure it out as I went. I set my wine glass in the sink, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, everything was quiet, and that quiet, it didn't sound like loneliness anymore. It sounded like peace. If this story of Marissa taking back her power had you cheering, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she placed that ring in Leela's hand and said, "He's all yours." What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.